I feel like that was something that was very damaging about the woke movement, where it devolved into, now if I'm somebody who is a woman, my whole identity is about being a woman.
Around, I'm going to a conference ready to showcase my work and meet with other educators, and yet I'm being treated like someone who isn't adding any value and is there as a prop.
In the past few years, there's been a lot of conversation about various kinds of discrimination for marginalized groups, and we thought we need to represent for our group of marginalized people called children.
Yep.
And what we mean by this is the term ageism. But maybe we can just start with a little bit of our own experience and a little bit of background, which is that you are 12, I am 15. We started Wequal when the pandemic first started back in 2020. So I was 10 and you were 7. Of course, as kids, there was a certain perception that came with that. And I would say that generally, when you're talking about young people, you know that they have less experience on planet Earth.
Yep.
But what I feel
that
like...
is a given.
Yeah. But what I feel like is missed is that you can have more experience with something simply due to differences in time allocation, right? Because you can have a young person that maybe all they do every day is just play Minecraft. And so they have a lot of experience with Minecraft, but not other things.
Yeah.
Right? But then you could also have an adult that spent, their entire life in one industry, and so they have a lot of experience in that industry, but know nothing about Minecraft, for example, right? Or other things. And so maybe you want to tell the story about what happened during the Vela conference in March.
I'm not sure.
Something like that of 2024. We were at the Vela conference.
Yeah, I mean, just to kick it off, it's really easy to assume a lot of things about someone who has has less experience just on planet Earth.
Yeah.
And that makes sense. Like, I'm gonna guess that maybe someone who's like 60 years old is going to have more to teach me than a 2-year-old.
Right.
But I think what's really important is the ability to change that perception based on what you learn.
Right.
And we have a lot of examples of, just adults treating us in a very demeaning way.
Well, I feel like part of what you're saying is that you can have... When it comes to perceiving other people, it's always going to be a mental projection that is not accurate, including yourself. Your own mental projection of yourself is also not accurate.
Everyone has a different idea of what a doctor is, a lawyer is, of, I don't know, a Chinese person versus an American person.
Right.
Of course, those can be useful. I mean, you need to have something to start out with, but you don't want to have a fixed idea of what that person is purely based on... that.
Right. I think that's
where racism comes in and sexism and all those things.
Yeah, well, I think part of it is that you are just going to have certain conceptions in your mind when certain terms are brought up, like somebody's age, or even somebody's name, or, somebody's gender, or anything like that might give you a certain perception that is what we might call a stereotype. And I think that people like to blame stereotypes or say that stereotypes are bad. I think that it's just about understanding that we as humans are very limited in certain things like our processing power and our ability to fully understand reality. We can't see reality for exactly what it is. We are simply not mentally capable of that. And so because of that, we need to distill things into labels, into mental models, into stereotypes, so that we can try to make decisions in a world that's super complicated. Like, and people say...
You might think you don't do this, but this is a microphone, right? Obviously, when I have the idea of a microphone in my mind, I'm not thinking of all of the
wires and
the wires and the mesh, and even the wires in the mesh are all combinations of smaller things, and smaller things and smaller things. So we cannot have all of that into our mind at once, and
we
try
just
and
say
communicate
microphone.
it. We put labels on it to describe, something that makes your voice clearer and the audio clearer, that has a comprehension of different I mean, I don't know a lot about microphones, but like all of the different materials put together in a certain way to do that. And that's a simplification of reality, and we have that for everything.
Yeah, well, and people say I don't like labels when all words are labels and all words are imperfect, because we can never fully communicate what we're actually trying to communicate in the most accurate way until we have like Neuralink, where I can literally just send you like a brain projection of what I'm thinking about. Yeah. You know, so that's
it might happen.
Yeah,
it's out there.
Oh, that would be great, but currently that's not what we have. So when it comes to those sorts of things, I don't blame somebody for saying like, oh, I'm talking to a 12-year-old, let me calibrate my expectations as to the sophistication of the conversation. What I think is problematic is when you don't update your understanding when you actually meet the person.
Yeah.
Right?
Like, for example, with the Vela conference, we were at, I think it was like one of the largest education innovation conferences
in the country.
In the country.
And Vela is a $4 billion fund. We got a $60,000 grant from them. They've been very supportive in helping.
School and our app.
and helping us and supporting us. So I was invited as a keynote speaker. You were there as well, along with several members of our team, and it was a really great experience. But it was very interesting to see how people would react to you as a 12-year-old, especially because if you're in person, so that you're obviously like much shorter than everybody.
Yeah. Especially since these are people that are working with kids every day that are supposed to, they're putting
their whole mantras.
We believe in kids. They can do things. They can do amazing things.
Yeah.
And yet I'm going to these conferences. I'll be like talking to this person. They'll come up to me and mommy was there, and they would be like, "You are so amazing," and they'll be talking. They wouldn't be talking to me. They would be talking to mom.
Right.
And they'd be like, "She is so amazing. I am so impressed.
You have done such a great job
for a 12-year-old."
Right. Yeah.
And then I'll be like, "What?" And then they'll be like, "What's your name?" And I'll be like, "Oh, I'm Isla. I'm CEO of Equal School." And then they'll be like, "She is so amazing.
She is so mature."
And it's like,
wow,
you did an amazing
just
job,
talking
Mom.
to, you know,
like I'm a trained puppy that did really well.
I know. Sometimes it's like so demeaning. They'll just like crouch down and be like, "What's your name?" And it's like, that's exactly how you would talk to like a little dog.
And it's like, I can speak, I can talk for myself. And I think it's not their fault. They probably don't even realizing that what they're doing.
Well, that's probably how adults treated them as a child, and that's also how like adults generally treat children. I feel like part of this is also a historical perspective, in the sense that we're very lucky as people we live in America, and then also for other developed countries, you'll see a similar pattern where parents can afford to treat their children like pets, in the sense that, pets aren't there to do things around the house.
Yeah.
Right? Pets are there to give you comfort and joy and be cute, and basically just use up resources, but not really give you back other than like, joy. Happiness and all that stuff, but
little warm feelings in your tummy.
Whereas Benjamin Franklin was working at 12 and he was a little late to the game. Like,
usually they would start with the apprenticeships at like 10 years old. Yeah. So he was like, come on, get your butt in here, you know?
Yeah. And so it's like
Benjamin Franklin.
Yeah. Like, people historically had children because they needed children to work on the farm so they could actually produce enough food, right? That was the purpose of having kids in a lot of cases.
Is for them to work and to help.
And now we're in a position where you don't need that. And we were also talking to some parents where we asked one of the daughters to ask their mom, like, "Why did you have me?" And she was like, "Oh, 'cause you're so cute." And then the dad literally said, "I wish they would never grow up." And it's like, okay, you're telling your child that their value is their cuteness when they're going to get old and ugly. It's like, okay, do you realize what you're communicating here? And I feel like that's a lot of how adults are treating children in developed countries, when we aren't actually expecting kids to have responsibility and be mature adults.
And we wonder why some of these kids are just like, dilly-dallying around, like not really sure what to do, not really taking any responsibility, not really adding any value. And it's like, well, that's how they're treated. If I'm going to a conference ready to showcase my work and meet with other educators because we both have something to share that's valuable, and yet I'm being treated like someone who isn't adding any value and is there as a prop, then if I'm being treated like that, of course, we have a really supportive environment where, of course, we know that we can create value, and that's why we have this podcast. But
for other kids who are being treated repeatedly like that, they're just going to match the expectations set by their environment. If adults aren't expecting them to do anything useful, why would they do anything useful?
It's not even going to occur to them, hey, maybe I can add some value in my parents' life.
Part of this is that if you have higher expectations for young people, that's basically implicitly empowering, because if you're expecting a child to be able to perform at a higher level,
they will believe that they can perform
because
by
asking
level.
them to do something that's challenging, you're inherently saying, I believe that you can do this thing that's challenging. And I think that young people are completely lacking that in today's environment in developed countries where we can afford to have these beings of like infinite potential just waste their time not doing anything, right? And I think that part of this is we actually did an interview where we had a story written about us, and the title was "Two Sisters Are Getting an Early Start to Entrepreneurship." And that was just kind of so frustrating because we came there to talk about our companies, about our solutions. And now it's about how we're getting an early start to entrepreneurship.
It feels like everything is being focused around the youth aspect of it.
About our age.
When we're trying to go there because of what we're providing.
And I feel like that was something that was very damaging about some, like, people will call it the woke movement, where it was trying to be about empowerment. I think the intentions were good, but
wonderful.
But we're kind of devolved into, now if I'm somebody who is a woman, my whole identity is about being a woman, and it's instead of like what about what Martin Luther King Jr. was saying about, you know, to be treated based on the content of your character versus anything about, you know, your race or your gender or your age or anything that could potentially, you know, be discriminated against. The whole point of fighting against that is to treat people as individuals
and not based on the color of their skin, their age, their gender. And it's like, of course you're going to have a difference if you are if you have less experience on planet Earth. Of course you're probably, if you grow up in China, you're going to have a different culture that you're growing up in. But everyone's an individual. Everyone can change. Everyone has some value you can bring to this earth. And instead of putting your identity and your persona and putting all the attention on something you can't control, instead of doing that, you should put the persona, you should put the attention around the thing you can bring that isn't about something that you can't control.
And this is something. So when I was 8 years old, I started a couple companies, which was one called ABC 123 Learning, where I forget exactly what I was trying to do that. I think I might have just been wanting to tutor other kids that might have been younger than me. And so I sent an email to my dad in December of 2017 when I was 8 years old. The email was...
You were looking through all the old emails.
Yeah. And the email is, "Hi, Daddy. No one responded for the ABC 123 Learning yet. I don't think they can trust an 8-year-old to tee their son or daughter." I spelled teach and daughter wrong, so, you know. I am 8. So this was just kind of so like a flashback into some of the experiences, because also when I was like, I think I was a little bit older at the time, maybe like late, almost turning 9 years old, I started Code Academy, where I was teaching younger kids, like some of your friends, Python and Scratch. And
we got a pretty early start to coding when we were little.
And it was kind of funny because, well, one of my students didn't know how to read, so I was teaching them Codable, And then they kind of went through all the codable exercises, and I was just having them like redo it because I didn't know what to do, and they couldn't read, so I couldn't start them on scratch. And so I just started teaching them how to read, because I'm like, okay, if you're my goal here is to try to get you to be better at coding, and the only way you can really do that is if you learn how to read.
Yeah,
right? And so I was like, okay, this is I'm like, okay, I'm gonna teach you how to read now.
So you started teaching the ABCs, right?
The ABCs, and it was frustrating to me because I was telling the parent, like, oh, okay, you can practice this with your child, and when they come back, then we can review and keep making progress. And I kept having to review the same thing every week because the parent wasn't doing the exercises that I was suggesting to try to retain what they had learned. And that was something that was basically I think part of it came from the fact that they weren't taking me seriously as a child.
It was more like, cheap babysitting.
Yeah,
yay, this is a good deal.
And the same thing happened with Python. I was teaching that, that one student's older sister how to do Python. And I was also, I was basically sending home like exercises of like, quiz them on what is a variable and what is an integer and all those sorts of things. Parent never really did it because every week we kind of had to do some review. We were still making progress, but it was just slower.
Yeah.
And I think that in large part it was because I was a child. If they were paying more for somebody who was older, then they would have valued it more. And I think that that's something that, was kind of frustrating to me. And I don't think I really read into what was actually happening because, of course, me as a 9-year-old thought that 9 was old. Just like every single time you turn another age, you think that that's the old age.
Yep.
And so it kind of, from that perspective, I was a little naive as to what the perception actually was. But I do think that it is unfortunate that a lot of adults, I think what's most damaging is that a lot of adults don't even really bother to try to cultivate a relationship with somebody who is younger just because of that surface level projection. And it makes sense in the sense if you're thinking short term, because short term you'll have to invest more in that relationship for it to actually produce value, because young people generally will need, more help with things if they don't have as much experience.
The first meal you're going to cook isn't going to be amazing, and then your parent has to watch over you the whole time to make sure you don't burn down the house.
Yeah.
And it's like in
the short term,
thinking of that,
it's more
then it's
effort.
like, no, I don't want to do that.
Yeah. But in the long term, you actually have more potential investing in a relationship with a younger person than with an older person, because younger people can learn faster and change faster, generally speaking.
That little kid could have learned the ABCs and learned how to read like a few years ahead of his class, and that could have been a great early start for him.
Right. And I think that is part of what is difficult when it comes to, if you're thinking about from a short-term perspective, it's going to make less sense to try to develop relationships with young people. And I feel like that's a reason why a lot of adults don't bother. And I think that that's really damaging, because in the long term, it can be incredibly valuable for young people to have that exposure to engaging with people that have more experience, and that can help you more. But at the same time, I think that people generally, I think, look at relationships at face value versus long-term potential. I think that this is something that people just generally make a mistake about when it comes to just like a psychological fallacy of this is what this person can provide for me now versus what can this person provide for me, later 10 years into the future, right? And people generally don't think that way, but I think that when it comes to engaging with young people, we have to think that way, because that's what young people can do more than anything else, is just have the potential to grow and change far faster if they're given the tools, if they're given the encouragement, if they're given the high expectation that I believe that you can be better. And I think that that's what's lacking, because in developed countries, people don't necessarily see the value or the need to do that. But just because it's not necessary doesn't mean that we shouldn't do it. In fact, I think that that's the most important thing that we can do.